Have you ever wondered what sparks a war that engulfs the world? As we delve into history's pages, we find that the causes of such conflicts are often intricate tapestries woven from multiple threads. In the case of World War I, the first thread was the intensified nationalism that swept across Europe. This fervent patriotism created a powder keg of tension, with nations vying for dominance and recognition on the world stage. The second thread was the formation of alliances. On one side, we had the Entente powers, France, Russia, and the United Kingdom, bound together by mutual agreements. On the other side, the Central Powers, Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. These alliances created a balance of power but also a web of obligations that could pull countries into conflict. The third thread was imperialism and colonial competition. The European powers were in a race to amass colonies, exploiting resources and peoples in far-flung corners of the globe. This competition heightened rivalries and stoked the fires of conflict. The final thread was a series of diplomatic crises. The most significant of these was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in Sarajevo in 1914. This event was a spark that ignited the powder keg of tension that had been building for years. These threads of nationalism, alliances, imperialism, and diplomatic crises intertwined to create a complex knot of tension. It was a knot that could not be untangled, and when it was pulled tight, it snapped, plunging the world into war. So, as we reflect on the causes of World War I, we see that it was not the result of a single event, but rather a series of interconnected factors. Each thread played its part, contributing to the tension that eventually erupted into a global conflict. These were the dominoes that tipped over, leading to a war of unimagined scale. The war was not a singular, monolithic event. It evolved in phases. The early years, from 1914 to 1915, were characterized by a war of movement. This period saw constant advances and retreats on both the western and eastern fronts. The armies were mobile, each trying to outmaneuver the other, constantly jockeying for superior positioning. As we moved into the middle years of the war, from 1916 to 1917, the nature of the conflict shifted. Trench warfare became the dominant strategy, with soldiers digging into the earth to create defensive positions. This was a time of attrition, of waiting, of holding the line. Notable battles during this period included the Battle of the Somme and the Battle of Verdun, which were both marked by their high casualty rates and the sheer tenacity of the soldiers involved. Then came the years of 1917 to 1918, a period that brought with it a significant shift in the balance of power. It was during this time that the United States entered the conflict, providing fresh troops and resources to the beleaguered allies. The German army, sensing the impending change, launched a series of offensives in the spring of 1918, hoping to secure a swift victory before the full weight of the American forces could be brought to bear. But the Allies held firm, eventually launching counteroffensives that would ultimately tip the scales in their favor. These phases of the war were not neatly delineated, of course. There was overlap, a blending of strategies and tactics as the situation on the ground dictated. But looking back, we can see these broad strokes, these shifts in the nature of the conflict that shaped the course of the war. As the war unfolded, it morphed, taking on a life of its own. It was a conflict that evolved, that changed, that adapted to the circumstances of the time. And in doing so, it left an indelible mark on the world. The war brought about an era of technological innovation and new tactics. The very nature of combat was transformed, introducing a new level of brutality. For the first time in history, chemical weapons were unleashed on the battlefield. The lethal gases like chlorine and mustard gas brought a terrifying new dimension to the horrors of war. The war also saw significant advances in heavy artillery and the debut of a revolutionary weapon, the tank. These steel behemoths, capable of traversing difficult terrain, played a crucial role in breaking the deadlock of trench warfare. The skies were no longer a sanctuary either. The introduction of military aviation marked the beginning of air warfare. Reconnaissance aircrafts, bombers, and fighter planes added another layer to the complex matrix of war. These innovations weren't just about destruction. They were about changing the course of the war, tipping the balance of power. These innovations changed the face of warfare forever. The war was fought on numerous fronts, each with its unique characteristics. The Western Front, spanning France and Belgium, was the scene of some of the most fiercely contested battles. Here, the forces of the Entente powers and the Central Powers clashed with great ferocity, their struggle marked by the devastating trench warfare that would come to define the Great War. Across the continent, the Eastern Front saw Germany pitted against Russia, and later, against the Allied powers in the region. This front was a theater of constant change, marked by advances, retreats, and the monumental shifts in power that occurred as the war progressed. From the muddy trenches of the Western Front to the vast expanses of the Eastern Front, these battlefronts were more than just lines on a map. They were epicenters of conflict, where strategies were tested, lives were lost, and the course of history was irrevocably altered. These fronts saw some of the most brutal and relentless fighting in the history of warfare. The war left a profound impact on the world. In the wake of the conflict, the human losses were staggering. Approximately 16 million people died, and another 21 million were injured, marking one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. Every corner of the globe felt the pain of loss, as families grieved for loved ones who never returned from the battlefields. Amidst this backdrop of sorrow and devastation, the Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919. The treaty marked the official end to the war, but it also imposed harsh conditions on Germany. This peace document required Germany to accept full responsibility for causing the war and to pay heavy reparations to the victors. This punitive approach sowed the seeds of resentment and anger, creating fertile ground for future conflict. The war also led to the disintegration of empires. The Ottoman Empire, which had spanned 3 continents at its height, was partitioned. The Austro-Hungarian Empire dissolved, leading to the creation of several new countries in Central Europe. The Russian Empire, too, crumbled under the pressure of war and internal revolution, paving the way for the formation of the Soviet Union. But the consequences of the war extended beyond the immediate aftermath. The harsh conditions of the Treaty of Versailles, coupled with the economic instability it caused, led to widespread discontent. This dissatisfaction, left unresolved, would eventually ignite the flames of another world war. The seeds of World War II were sown in the aftermath of the first, as nations grappled with economic depression, political instability, and the lingering bitterness of a peace treaty that seemed more like a punishment. The aftermath of the war was as tumultuous as the war itself. As we reflect on the impacts and consequences of this devastating conflict, we are reminded of the heavy cost of war, not just in human lives, but also in its enduring effects on our global society. In the wake of the war, the world was forever changed. The end of the war marked the beginning of a new era. One of the most significant transformations was the establishment of the League of Nations in 1920. This was an international diplomatic group developed after World War I as a way to solve disputes between countries before they erupted into open warfare. A precursor to the United Nations, the League of Nations was a clear indication of the world's yearning for peace and unity after the devastating war. The changes were not just on the political front. Society was profoundly transformed. The war had caused such an extent of devastation and loss that it led to a collective questioning of values, beliefs, and norms. The social fabric was irrevocably altered as people across the globe grappled with the horrors they had witnessed and the absences they now had to endure. Women's roles in society also evolved as they stepped into jobs and roles previously held by men, leading to a shift in gender dynamics and a push for gender equality. Culturally, the world saw a surge of creativity and innovation. Artists, writers, and filmmakers sought to express the disorienting experience of the war and its aftermath. This period gave birth to new artistic movements such as Dadaism and Surrealism, which captured the anxieties and disillusionment of the post-war generation. The legacy of the war was not just about changes, it was also about continuity. The punitive peace terms imposed on Germany through the Treaty of Versailles sowed the seeds of resentment and anger that would later give rise to World War II. This war, meant to be the war to end all wars, ultimately set the stage for another global conflict. The legacy of the war still reverberates through the annals of history, a testament to a world forever changed. As we look back, we remember the immense human cost, the courage, the tragedy, and the enduring impact. The lessons from this period serve as stark reminders of the consequences of global conflict and the importance of striving for peace.